How will Deebo Samuel's brand new contract affect where he goes tonight? Will one NFL owner's words about his star player change his ADP? And which pro and or Joe will put on a show for all of us watching tonight? Follow along with the live draft board. Watch our pick-by-pick analysis as we call the action from the 2022 FFPC Pros versus Joes. Finish him League number 4, who will win a 2023 FFPC main event squad. We'll find out. We've got a great show for you. Farrell Elliott and Dave Terpoli are here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
And the pressure, I've seen greater men than need a lesson.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now watching the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott.
Solace in the scripture, are we not all our father's sons? I became a man, nobody ever told me what a man was.
Welcome into a special edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. Thank you, Rob. Greetings and salutations to all the Bulkaholics and Ferrelliacs, as well as all the Dave Terp fans tuning in. We had to come up with a name for that. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com. I am, of course, your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. My co-hosts are the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, Farrell Elliott, and of course our live FFPC best ball analyst, Dave Terpoli. Tonight we have the 4th of 6 special episodes for you. It's the 2022 FFPC Pros versus Joes Finish Him League number 4 draft tonight, and we'll be covering it the whole way. Shout out to the chat room right now. You can post any questions you might have in there, both on YouTube and on Facebook or Twitter. You can connect with us on Twitter at HSFF Hour. I'm at Eric Balkman. Farrell's at J. Farrell Elliott. The Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship at KFFSC, and of course KFFSC.com. And you can connect with Dave Terpoli at Dave Terp. You can also post on our Facebook page at facebook.com/HSFF Hour. You can also email the show at the inbox at highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. We'll have do our best to get to all the chat room questions, tweets, and emails throughout the program tonight, thanks to the hard work of our producer and mutual friend Rob and our audio engineer and my best friend Bryce. Tonight, it is League number 4 in the Pros versus Joes. I'm going to tell you who's participating in it. But before I do, I want to remind everybody that the FFPC main event slow drafts are off and running. And we're actually only a couple of weeks away, less than a couple of weeks away from the launch of the FFPC live main event. So make sure you're registering for that at myffpc.com, signing up for to win $1 million grand prize. Of course, multiple football guys drafts filling up each and every day here at the FFPC. The 2022 FFPC Best Ball Tournament, that tournament grand prize has been doubled, as well as the prize pool doubled. And the Superflex Best Ball Tournament, that's the biggest thing that you want to get on, because that will sell out. Of all the things I mentioned, that will sell out first. We're over 80% full in that. $35 can get you $10,000. Of course, we're the home of season-long Dynasty high-stakes fantasy football, and Dynasty League starting at $77, so not necessarily just high stakes, but anywhere between $77 and $5,000 entry fees for Dynasty Leagues. Dynasty startups available throughout the next month, roughly or so, and then plenty of slow, live, sit-and-go best ball options at myffpc.com. Join the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship now at kffsc.com, of course. Those are the things you need to know tonight. We'll bring in my co-host right now. Number one, the definitive commissioner of fantasy football is here. He is Farrell Elliott. And then, of course, our FFPC live best ball analyst expert, Dave Terpoli. Guys, it's not all that we start a Pros versus Joes draft where we have some breaking news, but we do indeed have breaking news tonight, and it might affect how the draft goes. Deebo Samuel and the San Francisco 49ers have apparently patched things up. They've kissed and made up. They're BFFs now, 3 years, $71.5 million extension through 2025. Farrell, I'll pitch this to you first. Deebo Samuel, is this the last of the concerns you had for this player this season? Was whether the team and him were going to get together, the team and him were going to find a way to make it work out, because now I got to imagine, as I look at, and shout out to fantasymojo.com, at fantasymojo on Twitter, Darren Armani, who handles all the ADP and is the godfather of the Pros versus Joes competition. You look at Deebo Samuel's ADP in the FFPC best ball tournament. It was already fairly high, wide receiver 8 at the 211. Farrell, where does he go now that this has alleviated a lot of drafters from maybe avoiding him?
Yeah, I would be surprised that anyone was avoiding him. There was no issues with when this was going to get done. Both sides were posturing. Congratulations on a $71.5 million deal. I wonder who wanted it only for 3 years. Perhaps the player and his team wanted 4 through the negotiations, but this is a very good deal. Why not? Deebo Samuel will probably be an ascending draft pick as we try to understand, does his role look more like it looked last year? And, Balky and Dave Turp, I found out today I have a 1, 5, and 6 in my drafting when we return to Planet Hollywood. So Deebo Samuel just may have to figure into 1 or 2 of those teams.
He definitely will be in the running there somewhere. I think it's good for, obviously, people drafting at the tail end of the first round. Do I think he's going to move up to mid first, late first, early second? Probably not. But, some people might fall in love with him. I think there's a lot more questions than just the contract. I don't think the contract was that big of a deal.
No.
Eventually it was going to get done. I just think Trey Lance is still a question. I mean, Jimmy G loved Deebo Samuel last year. I mean, he got him the ball everywhere. You don't know if the same rapport is going to be there with Lance. I'm still not crazy about Deebo in 2022.
Well, who are you crazy about? Because I know you're crazy. Well, now, wait a minute.
You haven't seen all the Treylon Burks?
No. But wait a minute. He's not a 49er. And, we can't help your Brooks affectation, nor should we. Burks affectation, nor should we. But Deebo Samuel, to me, is the most talented offensive weapon for the 49ers. You are high on the quarterback. You believe that he is a elite quarterback, and you're willing to draft him as high as the 8th round in all formats of the FFPC. Who is going to help Trey Lance achieve that status as a draft pick, if not Deebo Samuel?
Brandon Ayuk. Easy answer.
Okay. Yeah.
George Kittle obviously will be as good as he is, but he's still going to be blocking a ton.
Sure.
I just think Ayuk is ready to take that next step, and he's getting a pretty big discount in drafts right now. Will I not draft Deebo Samuel? I mean, if I'm drafting, like I said, and you asked me what my least favorite pick was in the last draft we did. If I'm at the end and I have a Taylor, Cup, McCaffrey start, and the guys that I don't want to fall, I could see myself possibly taking a share of Deebo.
Sure.
On a main event team, probably not.
Okay, well, we'll return to this in the saga of Trey Lance, because I'm not. This is more of a Lance conversation now than a Deebo conversation. But my thought is that you're going to need more than Brandon Ayuk to push Trey Lance into the area that you expect him to be. And I'm not saying you shouldn't expect him there. I'm coming to terms with how he's going to get there, and that includes a lot of Deebo Samuel.
We'll get back to more of San Francisco 49er Sports Talk Radio here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. I'm assuming at least 3 more times, when Samuel's drafted, when Ayuk's drafted, and when Lance is drafted. We'll get to that. Let's tell you who tonight's players went with, as the first round is now complete here. John Paulson from 4for4.com, the industry pro, taking Jonathan Taylor first overall. Jeremiah Turner and Chris Herbert, a pair of FFPC Joes, went with Cooper Kupp at the 102. Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland from the Fantasy Football Hustle decided to go with Christian McCaffrey with their 3rd pick. Travis Kelce, the first tight end off the board tonight, going to the FFPC Joe, Steve Schatzel. Jim Coventry, rotowire.com, in the 5-hole took Justin Jefferson, and Henry Muto, who drafted in this league, in the Pros versus Joes a week ago tonight, he's very jelly about Justin Jefferson not being available to him at 5. But it is what it is. It happens. We already talked about how Henry got some great value in his last Sunday night's draft compared to where these players went in Monday and Tuesday. Henry Muto setting the FFPC Pros versus Joe's ADP. Chris Hammond, right after that, takes Austin Eckler from the 6th spot. JJ Zachariason, the late round fantasy football wunderkind or founder, whatever you want to call it. He ends up going with Jamar Chase at the 7th spot. Larry Weinauer has been on this program a couple of times. He ends up going with Najee Harris at the 108. Mark Andrews to Scott Pianowski at the 109. Stephon Diggs off the board to James DeVito, the FFPC Joe at 10. Dalvin Cook falls to Alex Dunlap from Roster Watch at 111. And DeAndre Swift to John Terry at 112. Terp, DeAndre Swift, where does he end up? The final day of FFPC main event drafts, which will be the Saturday before the season, September 10th. We're a little over a month away from that. Where does Swift end up? Is he a late first round pick, mid first round pick? Does he fall to the second? What do you foresee with Swift? Because I got to believe we're probably not going to see a ton of them in the preseason.
You definitely won't probably see any of them in the preseason. My guess is he ends probably somewhere in the 8-9 range, 10 possibly. If you want him, I mean, he's just not getting to the second round. I just don't see by the time that, live drafts are in September and obviously the end of the year when most people draft, DeAndre Swift is going to keep rising. And I can see it, him and Saquon Barkley being right in that Najee Harris, Mark Andrews range.
Farrell, do you see it a similar way with Swift?
Yeah, I'm really high on Swift. Stay healthy, DeAndre, and keep climbing the boards. It's a good start. I don't think team number 12 thought they would get a chance at DeAndre Swift. And you know what? I think that's a rising player. I don't know who drafted earlier tonight in the first 11 would have to fall to let him rise, but yeah, it's a good player.
Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't heard any news on him recently, but then today I saw him in a Football Guys draft. It slipped to like the mid to like 206 or 207 or something like that.
Yeah, sometimes that happens.
And it's kind of an outlier. There doesn't have to necessarily be a reason for it, but it is what it is. It just happens that way. Terp, if you were sitting, actually, Farrell, let me pitch this to you. Jeremiah Turner and Chris Herbert were at the 102 tonight. Jonathan Taylor off the board, which we found out from Fantasy Mojo, by the way, the most popular pick in FFPC main event drafts at the 101 this past week. Five out of six high stakes fantasy football players recommend Christian McCaffrey at the 101. Jonathan Taylor goes 101 tonight, and I think that is what we've seen in Football Guys. But Farrell, if you're faced with that decision at the 102 tonight, and it's not Kentucky, where the receivers tend to go quicker, in the FFPC, are you taking Kupp, McCaffrey, or perhaps even Travis Kelce there?
I will take Kupp there, but however, when we get to Las Vegas, we'll be past the preseason, and I'll know who the quarterback at Carolina is going to be, and that might make me change my mind on McCaffrey. Also, if I watch McCaffrey and like the way he moves, that might make me change my mind. But that's your only shot at Cooper Kupp. You're not going to take him one. He's not going to generally be available 4. So unless you're in the 2 or 3 hole, that's your only way to get involved with Cooper Kupp. So I've got my draft picks for Las Vegas. I won't get Cooper Kupp this year. He's not going to fall to 5 or 6.
And I was just going to bring that up, Farrell. He fell to the 5 in a Football Guys draft I commissioned late last night.
Hey, Football Guys, how late was it?
It was either the 10 o'clock or the midnight. I can't remember.
Highly unusual.
Well, there was one guy, and I won't say who, but
there's always one guy.
He said, and I can't remember which draft it was, and I don't think he'll mind me saying this as long as I keep it anonymous. But he said, "Hey, is the screen going crazy for anybody else?" And nobody said anything. And I said, "Yeah, what do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, it's just bouncing from side to side." And I'm like, I'm be honest with you, I try to go back out, come back in. I haven't heard of that happening before. He's like, "Oh, okay, maybe I'm just too stoned." And I'm like, you know what? That's probably the reason the screen is bouncing back and forth. We are through the second round here, gentlemen. CeeDee Lamb off the board to John Terry as he pairs his DeAndre Swift with CeeDee Lamb. Derrick Henry to Alex Dunlap. Davante Adams, the second consecutive receiver drafted by James DeVito here. A little mini running back run. Scott Pianowski takes Aaron Jones. Saquon Barkley to Larry Weinhauer. Troy's boys always throws me off. Larry Weinhauer takes Saquon. He's been on the show like 3 times, and I still screw up his name. Saquon Barkley there. Joe Mixon to JJ Zachariason. Javonte Williams to Chris Hammond. T. Higgins to for the wide receiver start for Jim Coventry here from the 5-hole. T. Higgins off the board, and then Nick Chubb to Steve Schatzel, the FFPC Joe, at the 4 spot. The third tight end falls tonight, goes to Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland at the 210. Deebo Samuel, the goes right at ADP tonight. At the 211, Leonard Fournette completes the first round. John Paulson from 4 for 4, taking Leonard Fournette to complete his running back start. So let's get back to the 49ers here. I guess I expected Deebo Samuel to go a little bit earlier tonight. Terp, are you surprised that he goes right at where he has been going for the last week?
I think that's just where he's going to stay. He might move up a little bit, but like I said, the contract is not the only question. I mean, there's the Trey Lance debate can go on and on. I mean, he's one of the most polarizing prospects in fantasy football this year. People love him, and people are totally not on him at all. So if you're not on him, you're not going to be on Deebo. A lot of people think just the rushing is going to take over. Also, the potential, his arm is way better than Jimmy G. So Ayuk will get a lot more deep passes. I mean, I would rather take the discount with Ayuk than spend this capital on Deebo.
Farrell, the other player we could talk about in this round here, and I just want to see if let's talk about T. Higgins here, because Jim Coventry I wouldn't say jumped the gun. I mean, you got to get your guys, but it was about roughly a half round earlier than he normally goes, normally falling to an early 3rd round pick. He goes tonight as wide receiver 7 instead of wide receiver 10 at the 208. I can't remember if you and I were talking about this or Terp and I were talking about this. The difference between Chase and Higgins perhaps isn't that big. And maybe Jim Coventry's onto that he might get close to Chase production here and only soaking a mid-second round pick into it.
Okay, so yeah, he's thinking that defensive coordinators are lining up to put all their efforts into Jamar Chase, much like they do with Stephon Diggs, and that Higgins will run free. But I also say that the Tyler Boyd there is a good target for Cincinnati, and I like every receiver drafted in the 2nd round and all the receivers drafted in the 3rd round up to the number 7 position better than I like Higgins. But I am in a minority here because Higgins, just like Dave Terp says, look, it's the end of the 1st round for Deebo Samuel, and that's where he's nested, and that's where he's going to stay. Higgins surprisingly ends up in the middle of the 2nd round in all these drafts. We watched him come from the 3rd round into a solid middle of the 2nd round pick.
Terp, Leonard Fournette here settles in at the 212. The whole weight thing completely blown out of proportion. And I'll lump myself into this because I was very concerned about it. High stakes drafters, especially John Paulson here, taking him at the 212. They don't seem to be concerned about that anymore.
Hopefully you got the week or so discount because, I mean, that was all overblown. At the end of the day, Tom Brady is going to put in the backfield what Tom Brady wants in the backfield. He loves Fournette. He trusts Fournette. So he was a little overweight coming into training camp or whatever you want to call it. He clearly looks good right now. It's a gift to pair with Jonathan Taylor.
Guys, what do we make of the start for Alex Dunlap here, specifically Derrick Henry falling to the 2nd round? Farrell, when you look at that player, what he's done over the last couple of years, I know there's been a lot of high-stakes players that have bet against him to fail in 2021, bet against him to fail in 2020, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, last year he did get hurt, but it was at the end of the season when it didn't necessarily, kill your dreams for 3 months. But what do you make about Derrick Henry now falling to the 2nd round, not only in the Pros versus Joes, but in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament as well?
Now, that's where I would take him. If I've been announced today that I have a 10 or 11, 12 spot, I'm going to be smiling because a month ago I never thought that I could get my hands on Derrick Henry. And I think we found something that Dave Turp and I might really agree with, although he's not a Henry guy. You're not, Dave, are you? But in Team 11 and Team 10, these are 2 of my favorite teams to start this draft. I really like what they did in the 1st and 2nd round here.
Well, let's talk about Dunlap's team here, Farrell, because and I know it's not just because they took a Raider here that Roster Watchers Alex Dunlap took a Raider in the 3rd round. But, because of this format where you only have to start 2 receivers, it's not like you're being pigeonholed to take a receiver here in the first 3 rounds. You can get away with pounding them later in this best ball format. Has that been your experience?
It is. It's that way in several of the formats in the FFPC where we have the dual flex. Essentially, you're starting two receivers if that's the way you want to go about it. I see so many boards in Kentucky where our rules say that you must start 3 wide receivers every week. I get into a situation that when I get to Las Vegas, I've been a little bit brainwashed by all the yellow stickers. But this year particularly, it's a situation where there's so much depth at wide receiver. There's wide receivers that I love even deep through the double-digit rounds. And it looks like our drafters here tonight are going one way or the other. The balanced team doesn't seem to be what they're choosing to do. It's a mix of running back heavy and wide receiver heavy, and wow, very running back heavy. And so, yeah, I'm happy with the idea of adding running backs. At some point, it's diminished returns. Overset and Coran the other night. They have to have a running back. You can't just, you don't need to go all the way to the 11th round, and they saved their draft fantastically with what they were able to do. But that's a little bit of an extreme. Most of these guys are building a balanced. Team 2 is all yellow, and Team 11 is all green, and everybody else seems to be trying to build a balanced team.
Yeah, and Scott Hoyt, by the way, who is a very successful high-stakes fantasy football player. He's been on the high-stakes fantasy football hour before, plays in the varsity leagues live in Planet Hollywood, where you can sign up and register for your stay to draft with us live at Planet Hollywood in the FFPC coming up in September. But he's also chiming in the Facebook chat. Farrell agrees with you that 10 and 11 are both off to very strong starts here. We will be monitoring those teams going forward to give you the lay of the land of what happened in the 3rd round. It was a lot of yellow. John Paulson takes Keenan Allen. Mike Evans then goes off the board at the 3:02 tonight to Turner and Herbert. Tyreek Hill to Drake and McFarland. Alvin Kamara, the 2nd consecutive running back drafted by Steve Schatzel. Then you have James Conner going to Jim Coventry. Michael Pittman to Chris Hammond as his first receiver. A.J. Brown, the 2nd receiver drafted by Zachary Eason. Allen Robinson to Weinhauer. DJ Moore to Pianowski. Travis Etienne is the number 1 running back for the team drafting in the 10th spot. That's FFPC Joe. James DeVito, Darren Waller, we already talked about. Alex Dunlap takes him at 311. And completing the 312 with the 312 pick tonight, completing the 3rd round, is indeed Mike Williams. And I do want to point out here, guys, Mike Evans actually slipped a little bit here in tonight's draft. Normally has an ADP of the 209. He ends up falling to the 302. I got to wonder, Terp, if you're in that spot at the 302 and you know that you got to wait a while to come back into the 4th round, but Mike Evans is sitting there, even though you already have 2 receivers, you got to look at Evans and grab him there. Is that what you would have done?
I'm doing backflips up and down the street. I have no idea. I missed Mike Evans news or something. I keep seeing him fall to the end of the 2nd round, and I don't understand why. I mean, Chris Godwin's still a huge question. People got to stop talking about Julio Jones. I mean, Russell Gage is, you either love him or you hate him, I guess, right now. And Brady loves Mike Evans. Brady loves Mike Evans around the goal line to get potentially the wide receiver 1 when it comes to touchdowns this year, plus all the other stuff you get. That's a gift.
Farrell, or I beg your pardon, Terp, FFPC Aiden pointing out Team 10 tonight. Drafting, that is James DeVito. He says you must love this squad with the Diggs and Allen hookup, and then obviously Devontae Adams and Travis Etienne to go with it.
It's pretty hard not to like how he started. I mean, Allen's not coming back to him, so it's the spot. If you're going to stack Diggs and Allen, you got to do it there. The chances of him coming back are slim to none. Also, though, Team 12, exceptional start.
You beat me to it because I was going to say if the comments, if the people in the chat room knew Terp like we knew Terp, Team 12 is who Terp wants to talk about. Go Terp.
Sign me up.
And by the way, that's John Terry, who's drafting in the 12 spot tonight. And don't forget that John led the entire Football Guys Players Championship. I believe he was in 1st, and I could be, John can pipe in and tell me if I'm wrong here. I believe he was in 1st and 5th place, heading into the final week, into week 17 last year. He didn't win the whole thing, but he did have 2 top 10 teams in the Football Guys Players Championship last year. No one else did that last year. I don't know if anybody else has ever done that before. He did it last year. And you can obviously see tonight, guys, for that back end, that 10, 11, 12. I think this is a precursor. You know, it's like that. It's that final round at Augusta, right, where those 2 final pairings are just beating each other up the whole time, knowing what's at stake. I think 10, 11, and 12 are going to cannibalize themselves at the end. And while they're all off to great starts, it'll be interesting to see because only one team can win this. You take second, you don't get anything. And 10, 11, 12 are really going to be beating themselves up. That's what's been happening so far. An interesting thing happened in the 4th round. We'll get to it right now as I recap the action here. Cortland Sutton to John Terry, Cam Akers to Alex Dunlap, Josh Allen paired with Stephon Diggs at the 10 spot to James DeVito, Deontay Johnson, the 2nd receiver drafted by Scott Pianowski, Dalton Schultz off the board as the number 5 tight end tonight to Larry Weinauer, who is a noted Cowboys fan. I'll just point that out. Marquise Brown to J.J. Zacharyson, then George Kittle off the board to Chris Hammond as his top tight end. A couple of running backs here. Jim Coventry takes Elijah Mitchell to go with his James Conner from the previous round. Breece Hall will be the 3rd running back, drafted by Steve Schatzel. Doesn't have any receivers yet, but he does have the top tight end off the board and 3 consecutive running backs now, Chubb, Kamara, and Breece Hall. Terry McLaurin is the 2nd receiver drafted by Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland. Jerry Jeudy, 4th consecutive receiver to the Wolf ticket of Jeremiah Turner and Chris Herbert. TJ Hawkinson wraps up the 4th round, the 3rd tight end selected in the 4th round, this one going to John Paulson with the final pick. All right, Farrell, Dalton Schultz over George Kittle. We know Larry is a Cowboys fan. I know you are a Dalton Schultz fan. Would you be able to make that selection, Schultz over Kittle?
You know, I would, and it would be an easy choice for me. And Schultz has pretty much settled into this early middle 4th, or you get a bargain very, very late 4th. And I don't think drafters should let this player slide until the later part of the 4th round. And very few of us are going to get him. Now, I learned today that I'll be drafting from the middle. And so I think I'm out of the Dalton Schultz business when we get live in Las Vegas, because he'll be gone before I get a chance to get him. And I'm not going to spend 3rd round draft capital on him. I like him because he is a great pass catcher in a situation that you have a quarterback that moves off the spot, but also shares what a lot of young, known as dual threat running quarterbacks don't have in their repertoire, is the way as a man that on the progressions or on the move can go through the progressions. It's the same thing that Josh Allen does. And he has receivers that don't leave the route. But the middle of the field at Texas Stadium is owned by Dalton Schultz. And I think it's just a wonderful situation for him to build on the receptions he had last year, as well as the touchdowns.
All right, guys. I'm just responding to something here right now. I apologize. I am still paying attention because this is a very heated draft as the 5th round rolls on here. Turp, you had the decision that Brian Drake had to make here along with Dwayne McFarland at the end of the 4th round. Terry McLaurin or Jerry Jeudy. If those are your 2 choices, we know that Drake and McFarland went with McLaurin. Would you have made that same call there?
I personally have more Jeudy, but I don't find any fault in the pick. I mean, McLaurin is clearly the number 1 option in Washington. And also, with the next round, I know I'm skipping around ahead, but 5th round Jalen Waddle is you can't really get much better value than that. And pairing it with Hill, my guess is you'll see Tua coming off that board to team 3 somewhere.
So this is interesting, Terp, and I know we're looking ahead a little bit. With Hill and Waddle going here in the 3rd and 5th round to Drake and McFarland, which, by the way, before we even started talking about this, they're getting some love in the YouTube chat right now saying how team 3 is looking pretty good here. Would you be okay with waiting to have Tagovailoa as your starting quarterback in this format and try to load up on other positions, knowing that Miami stack is your key to glory here, knowing that you have to finish first? Or would you still pepper in another quarterback, knowing that Tagovailoa, as I look here at his mojo here and where he normally goes, he's normally quarterback 17. So it'd be pretty easy to get a quarterback there before Tagovailoa, or you could go for broke and then just go with the Tagovailoa stack and somebody late. maybe Baker Mayfield. Just pointing that out. What would be your sort of approach on this?
He definitely would never be my QB1. I just feel like you have the QB2 with upside with those two guys already. You can build in a Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Trey Lance type of situation easily with that team, with pass catchers that are a little cheaper that will get drafted up here soon. Tua would never be my number one because I'm just not the biggest fan overall. But if you're going to go the way the Team 3 is going, with two of the most elite pass catchers in the game right now, and Waddle and Hill, my guess is Tua is going to come on this roster somehow.
And I think that's going to happen. Now, is there value in, because we talked about this, and Farrell and I talked to Liz Ballard on Friday for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, which you can check out at the FFPC YouTube channel in case you missed it. But she drafted Tuesday in the Pros versus Joes, and she said that she will look to stomp other people's stacks. Right? Is this something? If you were, Turner and Herbert at the 2, if you're Steve Schatzel at the 4, is that a stack worth stomping here later on in the draft? Do Drake and McFarland have to be aware of something like that happening?
I've never been in business of trying to break up stacks. I just don't feel like it brings any value to your team unless you're adding the tight end, Gesicki, and maybe you would take Tua. But to take Tua by himself, what does it good for your team? I just don't see the upside in a contest like this, that it's first or nothing. What is adding Tua to a roster really going to bring you to get you to first place by just blocking somebody else?
Guys, the 5th round is done. Brandon Cooks is the 2nd receiver drafted by John Paulson here. David Montgomery is the 1st running back chosen by Turner and Herbert, going with a heavy wide receiver team tonight, getting Montgomery at the 502. We already talked about Jalen Waddle to Drake and McFarland. DK Metcalf to Steve Schatzel after that. Darnell Mooney is Jim Coventry's 3rd receiver drafted here in the 5th round. Ezekiel Elliott off the board to Chris Hammond. Gabriel Davis, the Buffalo Bills receiver, to J.J. Zekarison. Chris Godwin to Larry Weinhauer, followed by Amon-Ra St. Brown to Scott Pianowski. Rashad Bateman to Team 10. That's James DeVito. And then Juju Smith-Schuster off the board at the 5'11 as the number 1 receiver to Alex Dunlap from Roster Watch. Justin Herbert off the board here. Pairing Mike Williams and Justin Herbert together is John Terry at the 12 spot. Farrell, let's talk about that 5'11 pick, Juju Smith-Schuster. There has been talk I've seen on Twitter lately from some high-stakes fantasy players talking about it. Juju Smith-Schuster, kind of a polarizing guy. I normally follow the money. And I look how much money they gave MVS. I look how much money they gave JJSS, and it's a deep yawning chasm between the two. However, Smith-Schuster continues to go ahead of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and there's a lot of people out there that believe he might lead the Chiefs in catches this year. What do you make of that selection at the 5'11", Farrell, knowing Alex Dunlap did not have any receivers yet, but he gets a high ceiling guy there in Smith-Schuster?
I'm all for it. And, Balky, you're looking at the board. Who's the next ADP receiver available?
After Smith-Schuster? Is that who you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Elijah Moore?
It would have been I went past it. You're looking at Thielen, Mari Cooper, Elijah Moore. Terp is another. Michael Thomas is a guy who's been ascending as well.
I think Terp probably would have taken Michael Thomas there, and I would have possibly been tempted to pull the trigger on both those wide receivers, but we see exactly what he did as you go around to the 6th round that we haven't talked about yet. So he is playing into his plan, and now Juju Smith-Schuster looks much more attractive when you consider how he built this team. My questions about this team go back to the 4th round when he picked up Cam Akers. How much I would have liked to have had a receiver there that went off in the 4th round after more than I would like to have that 3rd running back. So that's my complaint about team number 11. But other than that, I sure do like the players. And yes, I can live with Schuster. And I think in this, I don't want to repeat myself because I think we have a lot of the same people listening every week. But I'm a believer in Schuster catching a lot of passes from his quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. And those other receivers you listed all have significant questions at quarterback. Everybody has significant questions at quarterback compared to Patrick Mahomes. So I like this. I like this stack.
Terp in the 5th round, a couple of Bears went off the board, David Montgomery and Darnell Mooney. Which one do you have more shares of right now on your teams? Is it Montgomery or is it Mooney?
That's an easy answer. It's always Mooney. Mooney's one of my highest owned receivers. The target share is massive. I'm like we've talked about on shows before. I'm very, very high on the Bears. Mooney, Cole Kmet, Fields, all of them, love them. I just feel like they're very undervalued in drafts right now. David Montgomery is somebody that I didn't like him last year. He actually shut me up really quickly. I just don't see. I don't see the. I don't know. I just don't see it in him. I have a lot more Herbert later. Montgomery's kind of in the zone where we talk about the dead zone running back that I usually try to avoid. Usually at this time, I'm pounding receivers. I mean, I would take pretty much everybody that's been drafted after him. I would have took Waddle. I would have took Metcalf. Would have took Mooney. Would have took Davis. Would have took Godwin. Would have took St. Brown. Would have took Bateman. Juju we could argue about. Montgomery's not for me.
Farrell, one of the players that Terp just mentioned was DK Metcalf, who went pretty close to his ADP tonight to Steve Schatzel, who drafted him as his #1 receiver. One of the things, and I don't think we talked about this on Friday at all, but Metcalf inked that big extension, that 3-year extension that actually lets him back out into free agency at age 28, so he could cash in again. Yes. What are your thoughts on Metcalf this year, knowing, Geno Smith has been running with the first team this year? Can he make Metcalf great again here in the 5th round for not only Steve Schatzel, but the other FFPC players looking to draft him there?
When they do pass the ball, it will run through Metcalf. He's a superior athlete with great body and great physicality for playing the game. I don't believe the quarterback that's going to start and shine in Seattle is on the roster yet. So I think we will see Metcalf move up the draft once with some trades are made, once some acquisitions in Seattle come to pass. But with a player like this, you take a look at the quarterback position. Dave Terp is a big fan of Lance. You're a big fan of Fields. Your other young quarterback that you absolutely love, Terp?
I mean, Jalen Hurts, but most of these guys is rushing upside's too high.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's just, you take a look at these guys and the best thing I can say about them is their best football is in front of them. I think Hurts is clearly separating from those three. Geno Smith has never been necessarily a quarterback that you're going to put a whole great deal of faith in. And I don't think the Seattle front office is either. But Metcalf, no matter who's playing quarterback, is such a superior athlete that I say being in business with him in the 5th round is a good play.
6th round is now completed here, guys. J.K. Dobbins is the second running back drafted by, I keep wanting to call him Chris Vincent, another noted High Stakes FFPC player, but it's John Terry's team called Chris Vincent Sexy Sailor Vegas. I think there's a story behind that. J.K. Dobbins at the 601 tonight. Patrick Mahomes goes to Alex Dunlap from Roster Watch, so he gets the back-to-back Chiefs stack here with Smith-Schuster and then Mahomes in the 6th. Dallas Goedert off the board is the #1 tight end drafted by James DeVito. Devontae Smith, the 4th straight receiver selected by Scott Pianowski. Elijah Moore off the board to Larry Weinhauer. Kyler Murray will be calling the plays for late-round fantasy football's J.J. Zachariason is his #1 quarterback. Mari Cooper, the 2nd receiver drafted by Chris Hammond. Zach Ertz, the #1 tight end for Jim Coventry. Hunter Renfrow, doubling down on receivers in the 5th and the 6th is Steve Schatzel here. Metcalf and then Renfrow. Michael Thomas to Drake and McFarland. Alan Lazard off the board as the 5th receiver for Turner and Herbert here. And then Lamar Jackson completes the 6th round, maybe starting a little bit of a quarterback round in the 7th round. John Paulson grabs the quarterback 5 in this draft tonight in Lamar Jackson at the 6'11". So let me, philosophical question here, Terp. If you are Alex Dunlap here and you are picking at the 5'11", do you take Smith-Schuster? If you want Mahomes, do you take Smith-Schuster there, assuming that John Terry's going to want to pair Justin Herbert with Mike Williams and you'll get Mahomes on the wraparound? Or am I just looking way too deep into this?
No, you're looking into it perfectly. I mean, that's pretty much what he did. He knew that there was no chance that Mahomes was getting taken by Team 12, and it worked out perfectly for him. I mean, sometimes you got to pay attention to that stuff. And yeah, Patrick Mahomes might be the better pick and the sexier pick, but you got to studying your draft board is very, very underrated in drafts. People just, get crazy. They see Patrick Mahomes on the board and they got to take him. if they take Patrick Mahomes there's a good chance Juju doesn't come back to him, and then what? Then your draft just doesn't look as good as it initially did, and you might be like reaching, and you might be out of whack. Looking at draft boards is definitely something that people don't do that they should be doing a lot more.
Agreed.
Speaking of draft boards, guys, Henry Muto has the ADP update from what he did in his draft. Now, there is no first overall prize in the Pros versus Joes, except for bragging rights. But he points out that Chris Godwin went in the 5th round of the 3 Pros versus Joes he wasn't in. Henry Muto got him at 608. Elijah Moore went in the 6th round of the 3 Pros versus Joes that he did not draft in. And he got him at 705. So he's crushing the value on both those players. And then he brings up Michael Thomas, and this is the player I wanted to ask you about, Farrell. 801 is where he went in Henry's draft a week ago tonight. He goes tonight at the 603, and we are seeing a bump from Michael Thomas, a guy who was like a mid to late 7th round pick, sometimes slipping to the 8th. Now we're getting some more positive reports coming out of New Orleans. To me, it doesn't feel like coach speak and fluff stuff anymore, that this might be legit, that Thomas could start the season and not miss much time. He goes tonight at the 603. I feel like this is a guy that's going to, beg your pardon, not the 603. He goes tonight at the 610, but I feel like this is a player that's going to continue to rise.
Turk called it the other night, and some of our guests called it. I think Mr. Hansen, when he visited with us, called it. As long as this player keeps dropping, he becomes a very, very attractive player to draft at this point in time, especially when you've built a team where you've got steady eddies and a good balanced team. This is a perfect place to add him. And Turk may roll his eyes at it a bit, but I absolutely love his quarterback. I really think that Winston has a fantastic season.
I would never say an eye roll coming on that one. I mean,
yeah, I would say an eye roll coming on that one. Yeah, I
have a lot of Jameis Winston this year. I think he has plenty of upside. He has some great receivers on the outside.
Well, there's the guy that Landry. There's the guy you can sleep on. Then he's
definitely somebody that I have no issue being my second quarterback.
Yeah, well, yeah. Especially because he would be better than most of the guys you like as your first. So
let's not get it.
He would be good as a second.
Let's get into the 7th round here, actually, because these drafters are picking up steam after this little mini quarterback run went early in the 7th year. Adam Thielen to John Paulson, A.J. Dillon, then to Turner and Herbert. 3 straight quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts to Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland, Russell Wilson to Steve Schatzel. Joe Burrow goes to Jim Coventry, who makes sure that he's – now, I don't know if he was going to be fighting J.J. Zachariason over Joe Burrow, given that Zachariason, not on brand, taking Kyler Murray in the 6th round here tonight. But Joe Burrow goes to Jim Coventry. Drake London, the 3rd receiver selected by Chris Hammond. A bunch of running backs. Tony Pollard is the 2nd running back drafted by Zachariason. Josh Jacobs, let's talk about him in a second, goes to Larry Weinauer. Antonio Gibson to Scott Pianowski. Miles Sanders to James DeVito here. 3 very interesting running backs to talk about. Treylon Burks to Alex Dunlap, and Christian Kirk at the 7-12 tonight completes the 7th round. Farrell, I'm going to ask you about Josh Jacobs here. He falls to the 708. What's going on with him in Vegas? And I feel like, I'm not the biggest Josh Jacobs guy in the world, but man, in the 7th round, I'm on board with that.
How sweet it is. Just keep dropping, Josh. Just keep dropping.
He will.
His running buddy with a brick tied around him is Antonio Gibson. And Terp, it is. And I think that's fantastic for anyone that can have the foresight to realize how many times he's going to carry the ball and what he can do with it. The Kenyon Drake thing is an advantage naturally for Drake, but for both players. Jacobs at 200 carries is a better player than Jacobs at 250 carries. I'm very comfortable with that type of player in the 6th and 7th round. I was never a fan of Jacobs where he was going early in the year in the 3rd and 4th round, but as he continues to drop, he makes an excellent, especially in this case, 3rd running back.
Terp, we're looking at a bunch of, it's weird to say this, but has-beens here at running back in the 7th round, or at least that's the way they're drafted tonight. Not necessarily that they are has-beens, but Josh Jacobs, Antonio Gibson, and Miles Sanders. Farrell just gave us the skinny on Josh Jacobs. Who do you think is more likely to outperform his draft slot here between Gibson and Sanders, knowing that Gibson went at the 709, Sanders goes at the 710? Who's more likely to crush that draft spot?
Can I pick neither?
So you don't like either one in the 7th round?
We talked about Gibson again. Gibson's one of the most polarizing players. The talent's there. Everybody loves the player. But the situation is a disaster. He already is banged up to start camp. Brian Robinson's already getting talked about being the goal line guy. We all know McKissick's not going anywhere. So what's his ceiling? He needs 2 injuries away from being a number 1 running back. And then Sanders, Philly, he had 0 touchdowns last year. They're giving Gainwell first-team reps, but then they're coming out and saying he's their guy. He's in a contract year. I don't know. I mean, if you're a gun to my head, I'm taking Miles Sanders because I just think the situation's better. But neither of them really excite me.
Herb, I think you should get excited about your homegrown Miles Sanders, and
I love Miles Sanders 2 years ago, whatever that was. Miles Sanders.
No, I want you to join us in the present. This is the 2022 live draft coverage.
I don't want to because I don't want him this year.
And I know that as a man who got married in November of 2021, that you would like to relive that year because it'll be hard to top again. We've already talked about the fact that that was the best day's work that any of us will ever do.
That's very true there.
Congratulations, my friend. But the worst day's work that anyone did last year in Philadelphia was the Philadelphia defense. And I've looked into the Eagles because I didn't know that you were such an affectionate Eagles fan. And so I spent some time, and thank you very much for bringing it to my attention. There's not particularly a lot of changes on the offense that interest me, but there are significant changes on this defense. The defense
is legit.
It was a terrible defense last year, the last in sacks, terrible in turnovers, but the additions that they have made to this team make me think that occasionally Jalen Hurts won't be looking at an 80-yard field, that Miles Sanders won't be looking at that same kind of 80-yard field, and that they'll be getting the ball in a better position to score the ball. I'm excited about what the Eagles can do as far as putting touchdowns on the board this year, and I think that's why you'll be excited about Miles Sanders. That's why I like Josh Jacobs there. And Antonio Gibson, I do have question marks, but yeah, in the 7th round, I can live with that. But yes, get happy about your Miles Sanders. Quit looking backwards, start looking forward. Your Eagles are going to be a different kind of Eagles. And those touchdowns,
the best team in the division, I'll tell you
those touchdowns that went to the Giant Killer last year are going to Miles Sanders.
I hope so. I love the player, but
there you go. Well, now you've got a reason to love him because he's statistically going to support your affection.
I'll take Gainwell a couple rounds later.
Yeah, and you definitely could do that. Guys, we're through 8 rounds here. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the 3rd running back off the board to John Terry. DeAndre Hopkins, the 3rd wideout selected by Alex Dunlap here at the 802. Devin Singletary joins Miles Sanders on James DeVito's team as his 3rd running back. 4 quarterbacks go off the board this round. The first to Tom Brady going to Scott Pianowski. Dak Prescott paired with Dalton Schultz on Larry Weinhauer's team. Kadarius Toney off the board to J.J. Zachariason as his number 5 receiver. Trey Lance will be buddied up with George Kittle on Chris Hammond's team from the 6th spot tonight. A lot of running backs here. Chase Edmonds to Jim Coventry. James Cook is the 4th running back selected by Steve Schatzel. Kareem Hunt, the 2nd running back selected by Drake and McFarland. Damian Harris off the board to Turner and Herbert, the FFPC Joe tandem. And then we get another quarterback going to John Paulson here. Lamar Jackson in the 6th, Aaron Charles Rodgers in the 8th round as the first team to double up on quarterbacks. Nobody's doubled up on tight ends yet. So there's a few things to unpack from this round here. And Farrell, let's throw it to you right away. Ramondre Stevenson, we've heard from reports, is getting some love with the first team in New England. We already knew he was working on his pass catching there. And the distance between him and Harris was only Aaron Rodgers away. Harris goes at the 8-11, Ramondre Stevenson at the 9-01. Are we on the cusp of seeing Stevenson leapfrog Damian Harris in ADP, or are we still a ways away from that happening?
I guess we're going to see it. We're going to see it very early in the preseason. And it's interesting because I've heard the expression on the show and on a lot of other podcasts, the dead zone of running backs. Man, our board really shows a dead zone, but now they're stacking these running backs up in the 7th, 8th, and 9th round. And, Stevenson, a young player surrounded by young talent, which did not add a lot of downfield receiver help, added some red zone help. Running game is going to be very, very important. Short passing game proved to be important last year. So, yes, why can't you get involved with that running back? and they'll probably continue to go close on the board with each other.
The other thing I wanted to ask, and Terp, I'll throw this one to you here. The James Cook selection. What do you view James Cook doing in Buffalo? We know that he was drafted fairly high, second-round pick, I believe. We know he probably wouldn't have been a second-round pick for Buffalo had McKissick decided to stay with the Bills. But we see him as the fourth running back drafted by Steve Schatzel, and the second consecutive rookie running back by him. What do you think Cook does this year? And talk about it in terms of him being drafted tonight at the 809. What's his likelihood to outperform that draft slot?
He's rising up draft boards right now. It's pretty hard to ignore. He's getting a lot of positive press in camp. They're splitting him out. They're moving him all over. They love his pass catching ability. He's definitely a guy that if you're going to go very limited running backs, he's a guy you want on your team. I always say if you're going to go the zero running back hero build, you want guys like James Cook. You want guys like Tony Pollard. You want guys that have the upside that they're an injury away from realistically being a top 5 running back. And both of those guys have it. I like Cook a lot. I've been drafting him a lot more recently. Singletary seems like he's, the safer pick, but in these type of formats, the safer pick usually doesn't win it for you. James Cook definitely has the upside, the pass catching ability, and the best offense in probably football. I like the pick a lot.
Farrell, how do you balance something like that when you look at the Bills running backs? We know James Cook is a young, dynamic pass catcher, but we also know Devin Singletary could get the most touches on this team, maybe not the most high-value touches, but we know Singletary went here in the 8th round, James Cook about a half round behind him. If you're looking at those Bills running backs, is there a better one to target in this format than the other?
Singletary, because he's done it before, and he did it well at the end of last year. And it's a winning team that's not looking to make a lot of changes. Cook will be a great complementary player, but you talk about change of pace. I don't know how much he changes the pace away from Singletary. He will bring fresh legs. Wonderful college player, tremendous upside. But, yeah, less opportunity in a mature, winning, Super Bowl-directed team. There should be a bigger spread between these two players as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, polarizing takes on the Bills running back situation. I love it. Farrell, you were loving Alex Dunlap's start earlier, I think after like 3 or 4 picks, actually after the first 3 picks. How do you feel about it now, knowing, and he's on the clock here in the 9th round, knowing that he is through 8 rounds, his only receivers are Smith-Schuster, Treylon Burks, DeAndre Hopkins, all 3 of them with big question marks. Smith-Schuster in that Chiefs offense. You get Sky Moore here, so he's doubling up on the Chiefs pass catchers. But Treylon Burks, the rookie, DeAndre Hopkins, the suspension. You're still loving Team 11?
Yes, I mentioned it earlier. I think he went wrong when he took Akers. Not only did I not like the choice of Akers there, I'm curious perhaps if he was if he had his mind on Sutton and the guy jumped him on Sutton once. I don't know. But nevertheless, a receiver there before Smith-Schuster would have been the better play, and he could have escaped the dead zone, which I'm jumping in with Dave Turp and claiming the dead zone. And he could have just, he would have likely been in play to pick up some of the other running backs down here that we were talking about. As far as his wide receivers, great potential in Kansas City. And when Hopkins returns, this is a 17-week contest. Is that right, Balky?
Yes, correct.
When Hopkins returns, that's a good play.
We are through the 9th round, gentlemen. Ramondre Stevenson, 2 picks after Damian Harris goes at the 8-11. Ramondre Stevenson selected by John Paulson. Henry Mutu pointing out in the chat room, we'll never know if Turner and Herbert were going to go after Stevenson and get the Harris-Stevenson Patriots backfield there. Kenneth Gainwell instead goes at the 902. Cordero Patterson, the Magic Cord to Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland from the Fantasy Football Hustle. He goes at the 903. Brandon Ayuk to Steve Schatzel, followed by Robert Woods to Jim Coventry from RotoWire. Matthew Stafford, back-to-back quarterbacks for Chris Hammond. He goes Lance last round. He goes Stafford this round. Dawson Knox, the first tight end drafted by J.J. Zachariason. Kenneth Walker Jr., the rookie from Michigan State to Larry Weinauer. Cole Kmet, I believe he is the first team, Scott Pianowski, that is, to double up on tight ends. Mark Andrews in the first, Cole Kmet in the 9th. Chris Olave to James DeVito. Sky Moore, we just talked about, to Alex Dunlap. Pat Fryermuth to John Terry to complete the 9th round. Terp, this is the question that everybody's been asking in the chat room here. Would you have rather had Miles Sanders at the 7:10 or Kenneth Gainwell at the 9:02?
Probably Gainwell at the 9:02. I think that's a little early for him.
Mm-hmm.
Probably neither of them. I mean, I don't know. I just think Jalen Hurts he's good. He's still the goal line guy. I don't think that's going to change. Yeah, they're going to mix in some guys here and there, but Gainwell 9:02 is a little early for me. What's his ADP?
Kenneth Gainwell in the FFPC Best Ball Contest, according to Fantasy Mojo.
I feel like that's early.
It is early. He's normally going at the 12:04.
Yeah, so I mean, he's been jumping up this week because, the reports out of Philly, which are confirmed that he was getting some first-team reps. Miles Sanders is getting second-team reps. So these puff pieces that you see in the preseason, it's really hard to ignore them. But sometimes you have to, because 3 rounds of ADP for Kenneth Gainwell, that's a massive, massive jump.
In Terp, the listeners, they're listening to you. They're making choices based on your expertise.
Thank you.
That's true. That's true. Farrell, Trey Lance goes to Chris Hammond in the 8th round. Then he follows it up with Matthew Stafford there. What do you make of that Stafford selection, knowing that he did not have any other Rams on his team? It didn't create a stack. It just gave him a backup quarterback there.
Yeah, I think if you're going to draft Trey Lance, it's wise to draft another quarterback as soon as you can.
Now, why is that, Farrell? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, we talked about this the other night, Balky. It's an inexperienced player. And much to my surprise, Dave thinks Deebo Samuel takes a step back. We're putting a lot of belief in Brandon Ayuk, who's been a 55 and a 60 catch ball player for 2 years underneath a quarterback that doesn't have the spin rate of Trey Lance, but he certainly has the accuracy. I would want to have 2. I think there's better quarterbacks perhaps still available that can beat you with the feet. But, if you want a dual threat quarterback, go ahead and go around earlier and get Jalen Hurts and live with that. I don't understand. I don't understand an 8th round pick for a quarterback that is unproven, such as Trey Lance.
But it's the upside, right?
It's the upside of an unproven quarterback. But let me have the upside of Tom Brady, who threw for 5,000 yards last year. And, I'll take that upside. Let me have the Dak Prescott upside, where our beloved CeeDee Lamb and our uniquely and singularly loved Ezekiel Elliott play. Let's have that.
Well, the argument there would be the Lance drafter, which is Chris Hammond, already had George Kittle, but does the going naked quarterback trump the Lance selection there for you? If you were to go, now he wouldn't have had the opportunity to take Prescott or Brady. But if he would have, is that something that you would do? Farrell, this is the way I should be framing the question.
Yeah.
Are you avoiding Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and maybe Brandon Ayuk early because you don't like the stack of Trey Lance with those guys? Would you?
No, I like Samuel because with whatever success Lance has, he's going to need it from Samuel. I've already identified the fact that I like Dalton Schultz over Kittle, and I want to return to the tight end conversation because I'm interested in your and Dave's opinion. But no, I very much like Samuel because Lance is going to have to lean on somebody. This guy is going to lean on. And I also like Mitchell a great deal in this offense. I'm just not a Trey Lance fan, and I could be proven wrong, but there's going to have to be some catch-up work done in San Francisco by this young player. Guys, I've walked sidelines before games. I've hung out outside locker rooms. I've been around hotels of NFL players. It's very, very difficult when you don't have a resume and have a lot of responsibility on you. And that's what Trey Lance has. That's what it looks like to me. He's got a lot of responsibility on him. It's a very, very difficult job playing quarterback in the NFL. And he hasn't played it in a while. He hasn't played it at a level like this. And I question if he's going to have the success that his fantasy draft spot suggests that he has.
The other thing too is now with the Niners seemingly turning the page on Garoppolo officially, Lance could be heading up ADP, and if you were kind of on the fence of him with him, you probably are on the other side of it right now. Guys, let's get through the 10th round here. Irv Smith, second consecutive tight end drafted by John Terry. You know, it's Freiermuth and Irv Smith. Melvin Gordon to Alex Dunlap. Rashad Penny off the board just about a half round after Ken Walker's taken. Rashad Penny goes to James DeVito. A bunch of receivers here in the middle part of this round. Tyler Boyd to Scott Pianowski from Yahoo Sports. Russell Gage falls to the 10th round tonight to Larry Weinauer. Chase Claypool and his banged-up shoulder, although it's not supposed to be serious, will go to J.J. Zacharyson. Tyler Lockett to Chris Hammond, followed by Kirk Cousins. He's the second quarterback drafted by Jim Coventry. Justin Fields is the second quarterback drafted by Steve Schatzel. Garrett Wilson, the rookie receiver in the Jets organization, is the number 5 receiver drafted for the Fighting Chance Fantasy Football Hustle podcast organization. Ronald Jones, 5th running back selected by Turner and Herbert, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling completing the 10th round here as he goes to John Paulson as his number 3 receiver. Let's talk about Paulson's team a little bit. We have not touched on it. Terp, I feel like I know what you're going to say here, but the dude has Cook, Thielen, and Valdez-Scantling through 10 rounds, and he doubled up on quarterback. Lamar Jackson in the 6th, Aaron Rodgers in the 8th. I know this is probably not your preferred type of build. How could this work for Paulson?
Anything can work, but I don't know. So you start off with Taylor and Fournette. You can't ask for a better start. It's a great start. Stevenson, love him this year. Big fan of him. But the Madison pick, you need receivers. You have 2 quarterbacks with no one with them. When if you look at all the other rosters in the league so far, everybody is stacking. Team 5 got a double stack, the stack with Lance. We can keep going down the list. Yeah, you could probably pair up Aaron Rodgers late with Tanyan or Romeo, or one of those guys. Lamar Jackson, I guess, with Duvernay, but I don't know. Keenan Allen as a number 1 receiver will never excite me. He's probably the guy that's been least talked about in any of the first 3 rounds so far. And then MVS, he has never shown it before. He's shown the big play upside, but I like him a lot this year. He's my 2nd favorite Chiefs pass catcher behind Sky Moore, but I don't know. Too many questions on this team for me.
Farrell, Chase Claypool tonight. I'll ask you about him because he normally goes at the 10:08. Then he gets the shoulder injury, and then he goes up in ADP as he's drafted at the 10:06 tonight. This is overblown, right? The Claypool thing, it's not serious. You should still be drafting him in the 10th round.
That's what the coach said. And then there were the wise guys that came across the media and on the podcast that said, well, where did his medical degree came from? Well, it came from the trainer who's whispered in the ear, we examined him and, it's not much of anything, and hold him out and let it heal. That's a little bit you're saying that this is about where he goes, right? In the middle of the 10th round, or in the middle of the 9th round?
Middle of the 10th. Yep.
This player is a steal. He had an off year last year statistically, and he was frustrated in the red zone. Freiermuth got it. I'm sure buried in Pro Football Focus, and we could unearth it somewhere. And I would challenge any of our great statistician quant listeners to come up with it. But how many PIs were drawn in the red zone or just totally last year from NFL wide receivers? And I think that Claypool would be at the top for a variety of reasons that had to do with the delivery of the ball from Roethlisberger. But Claypool is probably one of my favorite bounce back candidates for this year. And, I will say this about Team 1, and I agree with everything Dave is saying. I'll give a tip of the cap to the drafter there after drafting Steady Eddie guys and Brandon Cooks, who's an all over the field receiver for the Texans. He at least, when he did go to his 4th wide receiver, he got a guy that could be just a incredible deep threat and explosive wide receiver in Kansas City. So at least he changed his MO for his wide receivers.
Terp, Farrell and I talked about Russell Gage on Friday night after the Julio Jones signing. How has knowing that Jones going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, how has that affected your belief in their production this season, specifically just with Gage and Jones? And what do you make of Gage here going tonight at the 10:05 when he had been like a 7th or 8th round pick earlier?
Keep drafting him. I think it's just a lot of smoke and mirrors right now. I'm not going to trash Julio anymore. I mean, do I think he could put up, a little bit of numbers? Yes, but he's a dust ball. I mean, Tom Brady got him, but he's nowhere close to the Antonio Brown signing of, that when Brady brought him in. Chris Godwin is not on the pup list, and everybody's moving him up draft boards. I still think there's a little bit of question surrounding him. I don't think it's a slam dunk. Like you saw Michael Thomas out there practicing, doing all that stuff. You haven't seen Chris Godwin out there yet. Mm-hmm. I still think he misses a couple games. I would not be surprised if he started the season on the pup list. I know that's not a popular take right now because people are starting to move Godwin up, and it's Godwin and Mike Evans has fallen to the 3rd round for some crazy reason. But I'm good with Gage. I'm good where he's getting drafted right now. I have no problem drafting him again. There's a lot of, good positive things in camp about him. The coach is coming out saying nobody can guard him. I know that what are they going to say? That he's been terrible, but I like hearing that stuff. So Tom Brady single-handedly picked him. So 10th round with a guy that Brady wants, with the questions at no tight end pretty much, and then the questions with Godwin and Julio being Julio. Give me all of Russell Gage I can get.
Balky, I want to follow that up. And Terp has been correct in calling these, puff pieces, and I think that's what it might be. Nobody really knows what's going on anywhere yet until we put on some pads, which happens.
Nope. It's all, you saw all week all the, videos that have been, circulating through Twitter of guys who have had, my guy Treylon Burks, literally everywhere on Twitter, and how he's just killing corners and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. There's no pads on. These corners, they're not really trying that hard. They don't want to get hurt early in camp. Let's see it when the pads start. Let's see it when the preseason. Let's watch preseason games and see how these guys do, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, these guys are professional athletes, the greatest professional athletes in all of sport, and they're running around in their shorts. And
it's hard. Like last year, you saw all the guys who got hyped up, and not that it is error proof, but most of these guys who get hyped up early in camp are just terrible draft picks.
Okay, guys. Let's get through the 11th round here. And a South Beach dream has died in the 12th, so I want to get to that as well. But the 11th round, Alexander Madison, the 4th running back taken by John Paulson. Derek Carr off the board as Turner and Herbert waited till round 11 to draft their first quarterback. They get a good one in Derek Carr there. Rashad White, the rookie running back in Tampa, to Drake and McFarland. Jahan Dotson, another rookie, he goes to Steve Schatzel here. Naheem Hines, 4th running back selected by Jim Coventry. Hunter Henry, 2nd tight end off the board for Chris Hammond here at the 11:06. Isaiah Spiller, another rookie. Wow, this is the rookie round. Isaiah Spiller to late round fantasy football, J.J. Zekarison. Mike Gesicki to Larry Weinhauer as his 2nd tight end. Tim Patrick, the Denver Broncos receiver. Scott Pianowski makes him his 11:09 selection. Gerald Everett, another team doubling up on tight ends here. Team 10, that's James DeVito, and then Jacoby Myers off the board to Alex Dunlap, followed by the 5th rookie of this round, 4th rookie of this round. I think it was a 4th rookie. 4th rookie of this round, Damian Pierce in Houston, goes to John Terry. So where do I want to take this first? Okay, let's talk about Hunter Henry here, Farrell, and I'm going to pitch this to you. Chris Hammond takes Hunter Henry at the 11:06 tonight. Now, what we do know about the Patriots offense is that we know very little about it, right? We think Matt Patricia's calling the plays. We don't know. We think Bill Belichick has an influence on it. We don't know. We think Hunter Henry's going to be the main pass-catching tight end there. We don't know. What do you make of Hunter Henry here, who's fallen about a half round off his ADP? What's his role in New England going to be? And do you like him as tight end 14 in this draft tonight?
Sure I do. 55 catches, 6 to 8 touchdowns. There is talk about more of a 21 personnel and Jonnu Smith appearing again. Balky, we talk about following the money. That Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry proved that we don't need to follow it in New England. For fantasy football purposes, Hunter Henry was somewhat reborn, and we've got last year, and we've got a little bit of an uptick in the quarterback. I think he throws more than 22 touchdowns that he threw last year. I think he approaches 30 touchdowns, and that's why Henry will likely fall in around the same numbers that he fell in this year.
Terp, Tim Patrick goes tonight roughly right around a round earlier than what his ADP is. Now, Liz Ballard, who we had on Friday night, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it yet, she loves Tim Patrick. She's been drafting Tim Patrick everywhere. I should have pushed back on this a little bit, and I didn't, and I regret not doing it. But I look at that Denver team: Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler, Jerry Jeudy, Albert Okwuegbunam. They drafted Greg Dulcich, Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon. I mean, all those guys are more than capable of catching passes. So why is Tim Patrick going in the 12th round on average, the 11th round tonight? How have you been handling Tim Patrick in your drafts?
Very high ownership. I mean, I'm a big supporter of Denver this year. Russell Wilson is by far my number one ranked quarterback. I easily could see him finishing right up there with Josh Allen, probably a little bit below. The weapons are just ridiculous. I mean, a lot of very smart people are hating on Jerry Jeudy this year. A lot of people don't like him. As you can see, he's been falling. A couple drafts we did last week, 5th round. To me, that's crazy because I'm a Jeudy guy. But Tim Patrick, he provides a lot to this team. Russell Wilson's never had a solid wide receiver 3. Never. Okay. And now he has 5, 6 weapons. If they let Russ cook like Seattle should have, I mean, this team's going to be really, really tough to stop. And Tim Patrick's a great, great value right now in drafts, especially in the best ball format.
He runs fantastic. He runs fantastic routes. He has excellent hands. And when called on cold off the bench, he delivers, and he's earned it. Russell Wilson has never had a real third receiver like Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick's never had a Russell Wilson, and how fantastic it's going to be. I'm right there with you, Turp.
Tim Patrick's way better in best ball than he is in redraft. Just because
I don't know. I think he could be more of a steady Eddie once the season starts.
He could, but it's
looking at him in the past. Yeah, looking at him in the past, he had a little of that Tyler Lockett variance. But I think you've identified a player that you can count on week to week here, Turp.
I think it's tough. I think as a flex option, he's going to be very, very difficult because you're going to see the ball getting spread around a lot more unless there's an injury. If there's an injury, then he's a smash. But with Sutton, with Jeudy, with Patrick, with the tight end, Hamler, I don't think he'll ever start, in season long. But it's tough. He's a way better best ball guy for me.
Farrell, if Tim Patrick is a solid guy week to week in like the Kentucky main event, Football Guys Players Championship, FFPC main event, anything like that, if he is a solid flex guy there, more of a guy you can trust week to week, whose expense does it come at? Because I know a lot of people. People are drafting Sutton and Jeudy quite a ways ahead of them. We know about the tight ends there. Whoever comes out as a starting tight end could be pretty viable. Who does Patrick take those targets away from, in your opinion?
At the expense of Jerry Jeudy, but the Denver Broncos have 100 to 120 more passes in them.
Okay. All right.
So that's where most
easily.
12th round is complete, guys. Kenny Golladay was the first pick of the 12th round of John Terry. Matt Jones in New England goes to Alex Dunlap to back up Patrick Mahomes. Darrell Henderson off the board here. I have a Darrell Henderson sighting. He goes to James DeVito. Tyler Allgeier to Scott Pianowski. Tua Tagovailoa does not make it back to Drake and McFarland here at the 3rd spot as Tagovailoa is backing up Dak Prescott for Larry Weinhauer. David Njoku, the 2nd tight end drafted by J.J. Zachariason. Michael Carter off the board here is the number 4 running back for Chris Hammond. Julio Jones, about 2 rounds plus after Russell Gage to Jim Coventry. Khalil Herbert is the 5th running back chosen by Steve Schatzel. Rondale Moore to Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland. The Arizona receiver is their number 6 receiver there. And then out of the next, and I won't announce all the picks because we're going to come up on the end of the 12th round here. But out of the next 7 picks starting here, 6 of them were tight ends. Massive tight end run. Tyler Higbee to Jeremiah Turner and Chris Herbert here. And then you have Robert Tonyan, the final pick of the 12th round, backing up TJ Hawkinson for John Paulson. Terp, Rondale Moore. Let's talk about him from McFarland here and Brian Drake. What does he do in Arizona? Is he the type of guy that, maybe gets off to the fast start with the Hopkins suspension and then peters out? Or is he a guy that has a role in this offense all year, in your opinion?
I think he has a role in this all season. I'm a big fan of Rondale Moore this year. He's definitely somebody I'm overexposed compared to the field. I just think that without, Chase Edmonds there, that's plenty of other opportunities that he wouldn't get before. I'm not the biggest James Conner guy, and obviously with DeAndre Hopkins being suspended for the first couple games, I really think Moore is a guy that, for instance, 2 picks before, if you're going to line up on paper Julio Jones versus Rondale Moore in a best ball format, I'm taking Rondale Moore 1,000 out of 1,000 times. The upside is immense, especially with spike weeks. What's the best you're getting with Julio Jones? Maybe a 18-point week once. You're going to get more 2-point weeks than you are 18-point weeks.
It's weird because, Julio Jones, you look at him and what he's been in the NFL, you're like, oh, this is a guy that's going to thrive in between the 20s.
The name recognition's there, and that's what people are going to see, Julio Jones.
Name recognition, but I just think of like the body type and what he's been able to do. If you have Evans on the other side,
he looks like he got bigger.
Well, and that could be, but he's never been a big touchdown guy in his career.
He hasn't been. He's not taking away from Mike Evans' targets.
I'm just saying, like, when you have Evans on one side and Jones on the other side, for defenses with Tom Brady trying to figure that out in the end zone, who do you roll the safety to? Because both of those guys are capable. However, Julio Jones doesn't have the track record of catching those red zone touchdowns like Mike Evans does, which is weird, but that's factual.
Julio Jones last year, you'll remember the catch off the defender's helmet. I love that catch. Those won't be coming from Brady. How fascinating it would be for Julio Jones actually to extend his hands and the ball will be there. When Julio Jones runs a pattern and turns and the ball is there. Perfect timing from a talented quarterback. Yeah, I agree with the Rondale Moore upside. I would challenge the head coach, and I'm sure somebody else has.
1,000%. I'll challenge him too. I think that team's a disaster this year.
You've got to get the ball to Rondale Moore, and they have never utilized him correctly. He runs.
It's mind-blowing. The coach is an idiot.
He runs vertically to the offensive line. He rarely lines up in the backfield. You don't even get too many jet sweeps with him. I don't know why they drafted the player if they're not going to utilize him. He's a wonderful guy from here in Louisville, Kentucky, and we're all rooting for him. I just don't see it. If not last year, why this year? You say there's availability and opportunities because Watson's not there. I don't know. It's not a player that I'm targeting in this draft.
All right, so guys, let's kick things off the 13th round. I talked about this tight end run, and here's where it is: George Pickens to John Paulson at the 1301, then 4 straight tight ends. After we ended round 12 with 2 tight ends, Hayden Hurst goes to Turner and Herbert. They wait until round 12 to get their tight end, and then they go back to back Higbee and Hurst. Albert Okwuegbunam to Drake and McFarland. Noah Fant, the tight ends that were traded for each other, go back to back in this draft. Noah Fant to Steve Schatzel, followed by Austin Hooper here at the 1305 to Jim Coventry. Michael Gallup off the board to Chris Hammond. Trevor Lawrence is backing up Kyler Murray for J.J. Zacharias, and Josh Palmer off the board as the 5th receiver selected by Larry Weinauer. James Robinson to Scott Pianowski. Jameis Winston, there he is. We were talking about him earlier. He goes tonight to James DeVito. Evan Engram off the board at the 1311 tonight to back up Darren Waller for Alex Dunlap. And then Daniel Jones behind Justin Herbert. One thing that was for John Terry. One thing I think is worth pointing out here. George Pickens had an ADP of the 16th round. We saw the video this week of him making mincemeat of the Steelers secondary on a big touchdown in practice. Farrell, he jumps up about 3.5 rounds tonight. George Pickens to John Paulson here at the 1301. Should we be a believer in Pickens? Not necessarily because of that play, but should we be a believer in Pickens in redraft leagues like this, like the FFPC best ball tournament as well?
That was drafted by a pro, right? The Joes won't draft him that high. The Joes will have to see him do something before moving him that high. In our previous conversation about Moore, I meant to say Hopkins when I said Watson. I've got Watson on my mind because the NFLPA just released a statement about the upcoming judge's decision on that ball. I texted it to you. It sounds as if the Players Association feels that he'll be playing some this year. Look, this is the perfect puff piece up push for Pickens. Yeah, Pickens. The best thing you can say about what Pickens has done so far is his teammates really respect him, and we're talking about upside. If this drafter believes in him, why not? You could have got him later. There's no reason not to have him on your roster. Don't draft him in the 13th round.
All right, guys, let's bring him in right now. He's our first guest tonight. You hear him on the weekend on the RotoWire NFL Sirius XM Fantasy Football Show. He's the host of that. He's the defending champ of the Kings Classic, and he is here joining us tonight. You follow him on Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL, drafting out of the 5-hole tonight. It is Jim Coventry. Jim, welcome into the broadcast, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, everyone. And my eyes will be diverting a little bit as I'm looking at draft boards, but I'm excited to be with you guys.
Well, we're excited to have you for sure. And you had to be excited to see Justin Jefferson at the 105 tonight. Was he in your plans at all as a possibility?
Stunned. I had him listed and I laughed. I go, yeah, right, 105. He showed up. And you guys would have crucified me if I had not gotten him, because I am super high on Dalvin Cook this year because they're going outside zone, less hits, easier hits, skill set match, robust screen game. So Cook was my guy, but there's no way you're passing on Justin Jefferson, right?
No, I mean, at that point, it's really, really good. We talked about Higgins versus Chase this year. Are you also of the belief that the difference between their outputs this year is maybe not as big as most people think it is, and that's why you went with Higgins in the mid-second?
For sure. They're co-alphas. They're both dynamic receivers. Higgins started out slow last year. His shoulder was hurt. He did not have a good start to the season. But then you saw when teams would spend too much attention on Chase, Higgins got his. They'll go back and forth. And in the best ball league, love it because, Chase will go off some weeks, Higgins others, but they both have a floor too.
And you follow that up with James Conner. You get Elijah Mitchell, so your backfield's taken care of there. Terp was talking about earlier the target volume that Darnell Mooney is going to see this year. Are you of the same belief that maybe it's not the greatest offense in the world, but the fact that he sees all this volume there from Justin Fields, that makes him a solid pick in the mid-fifth?
It is huge. The volume, and we saw last year, I think we thought Mooney was a situational deep threat when he came out. And last year, he showed he was so much more. They were using him at all levels of the field. And late in the season, teams were keying on him, and he was still playing well. So wheels up on Darnell Mooney. He's a really hard worker, I hear, from people in their camp, but it shows. And he's becoming a better player by the year.
Jim, you've drafted in this Pros versus Joes before. Have you ever set yourself up like, okay, I really would like to have 2 tight ends by this point of the draft. I'd really like to have 2 quarterbacks at this point in the draft. How do you look at and I know the draft has to come to you, but how do you set up your team construction going into this?
So you're correct. You need multiple tight ends. And I know I really wanted one by the 11th round. And then the way the draft board fell, and I know you guys don't like Julio so much, and I get that. But, a quick note on Julio. I don't think the Bucs would have pursued him if they felt he wasn't healthy. And he seems to be past those hamstring issues. And they're going to limit his snaps. But they're going to be high leverage snaps, and they're with Tom Brady. Mike Evans is going to be getting heavy coverage. Godwin will. So Julio's going to see the lightest coverage of his career. And then you guys talked about the red zone. Matt Ryan was great at seeing Julio get bracketed and then say, okay, I got another guy open. Tom Brady's going to have Julio in single coverage in the closed red zone. Mike Evans is a great red zone receiver, but if Julio's single covered, you know what I mean? Not too bad. Anyway, it's a late pick. It's late in the draft. Not going to, make or break. But that said, the tight ends, you're correct. Wanted to get a couple of them. Didn't want 2 Titans on my team. Didn't want Woods and Hooper. But one of them could have on and off success while the other doesn't do a whole lot. So maybe having both of them, as much as I didn't like that, Hooper has been a top 5 tight end. Now, it was back in the days with Matt Ryan, and then he was in a 3 tight end mess in Cleveland. But you know what? Ryan Tannehill probably is going to like him as a tight end.
All right, so let me ask you this, and this is something that I think I've touched on previous Pros versus Joes broadcast. You obviously get the Burrow T. Higgins stack, right? You
Yes.
get Kirk Cousins as well. But now all of a sudden you find yourself not only with Robert Woods, but as you just alluded to, Austin Hooper. Does that make you likely to grab Ryan Tannehill later in this draft, or does that not affect what you're building up for your squad here?
I was thinking of taking riskier quarterbacks like a Justin Fields, maybe a Trey Lance, but because Burrow and Cousins has the new offense, they're going to be pass heavy. So I'm expecting there to be so much pass volume. I'm not taking a third quarterback. I wanted one, but not with those two guys. If I lose because of those two guys, I live with that.
Jim, I think the jewels of your draft are your later running backs. That's what I really like here. Edmonds, Hines, and Marlon Mack. What do you perceive for Marlon Mack? Obviously, you've watched Hines and Mack play their days at Indianapolis. Is he going to take that job down in Houston? Is he going to be the guy?
You know, I would expect he would. Dameon Pierce didn't have great measurables coming out. Mack is another year removed from the Achilles. Maybe he's got something. But the one thing I really like, Warren Sharp does his schedule analysis, and he projects Houston to have a very, very favorable schedule against the run. And that is a big deal to me.
And it makes sense here. You're coming up now. And by the way, Jim, you're getting some love in both the Facebook and YouTube chat for the back half of your draft so far. I don't know what that says about your first half. We like your first half.
That's all right.
But people are talking up your second second half of your draft. You were just on the clock here in the 16th round. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to take this player here.
You know, Jamison Crowder misses time now and again, but he goes to Josh Allen. Talk about an upgrade at slot. We love Manny Sanders and we love Cole Beasley. But Jamison Crowder is a beast in the slot, right? And the way Josh Allen throws to the middle of the field, when Crowder's healthy, there's a good chance he sees a good target share. So, again, in this format, if I don't have to pick the week he goes off, I kind of like that.
Jim, final question for you before we let you get back to drafting. We were talking about Miles Sanders in the Eagles running back situation earlier. I believe anybody who follows you or RotoWire on YouTube knows that you might have an interesting take on this, or at least a strong take on Miles Sanders and his 2022 outlook.
Yeah, so with Miles Sanders, what we often do is we look at yards per carry, and it's been impressive in his career. But what the thing is with the coaching staff, he's not consistent. He still bounces too many runs to the outside, doesn't always follow the blocks, and that has gotten his snap share. He played 12 games in 2 straight years. We've seen his touch share go way down, and that tells me the coaching staff is not buying into him as a consistent option. So therefore, Miles Sanders is in trouble. Kenny Gainwell showed very well as a receiver, maybe not as good as a runner as I thought. I think Gainwell gets the receiving part, and he has a good chance, if he shows consistency, to take work from Sanders on early downs.
We follow you on Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL. We listen to you on SiriusXM Fantasy on the weekends as part of the RotoWire broadcast. And good luck defending the belt in the Kings Classic this year, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll follow that as well, and we'll check you out everywhere you are found on the interwebs. Jim Coventry, thank you so much for joining the broadcast tonight. Good luck in all your leagues this year, including Pros versus Joes tonight, man.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your work, all you do, and thanks for running this thing.
You got it. Jim Coventry, ladies and gentlemen. Good stuff there on his Miles Sanders take, Turf. I think he makes some sense here with a lot of the stuff that he said.
100%. I mean, it's just, you see the writing on the wall. Like you say, follow the money. They didn't give him he got 0. I keep going back to 0 touchdowns. Like I know, like people say it's an outlier, but if they like the guy that much, they would give him that work around the goal line. But they're finding other ways. Boston Scott, Gainwell. I mean, they have so much money invested elsewhere that I just think Gainwell is the better pick this year. And I love Miles Sanders, the player, but.
And, baby, you are sticking with it. That's why I'm proud of you. You talk about sticking with something, Balky. Team number 6, I didn't catch the Joe's name who's drafting team number 6.
That's Chris Hammond. Chris Hammond, congratulations to you. Your draft from rounds 13 through 16 at wide receiver is stunningly impressive. Congratulations. It is really good. And it was Michael
Gallup. I don't know if I would ever call Marvin Jones thoroughly impressive.
Well, I mean, but thoroughly impressive for a 15th round pick, though, sir. Right?
Yeah. And every year he catches more balls than Brandon Ayuk.
We're gonna find a bet on that one coming up.
Well, no, but you've been wanting to talk about the past, about Miles Sanders. So let's take a page from the past and dust off those numbers. And
We don't need to worry about the past anymore. It's the future with Trey Lance.
Yeah, we
not the
should.
old guy,
we
Jimmy
should.
G.
And you know, the future in Jacksonville looks brighter, especially. But you take this player last year, Balky. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 70 catches out of that mismatch in Jacksonville.
I like Marvin Jones. I'm only playing with that one.
Okay, well, don't play like this is very important stuff here. I mean, you know, this people are
You can't be nice
signing
all the
up for
time.
more FFPC teams when
I've
they
been
say,
too
"Oh,
nice
I got to
tonight.
get some
I haven't
Marvin
made fun of
Jones."
anybody's team, really.
You know,
you know what's crazy is so you look at what Marvin Jones did. Now, I'm trying to think, guys. Who was the quarterback in Detroit in 2019? That was pre-Goff, right? I mean, it wasn't anybody good.
a Duke's mixture of quarterback
Wasn't Stafford
talent in Detroit.
Oh, was it Stafford? Yeah, it was Stafford. Yeah. Okay.
When Stafford wasn't available.
Right. Okay. So in 2019, 62 for 779 and 9 touches for Jones. 2020, this is with again with Stafford, 76 for 978 and 9 touchdowns. And then he goes to Trevor Lawrence last year, still 73 for 832, only 4 touchdowns. So you could make the case that maybe Marvin Jones doesn't have the highest ceiling in the world in round 15, but certainly you could do a lot worse there. The argument against Marvin Jones there is you don't want a steady guy as he has been the last few years. You'd want to go with more of an upside guy. Christian Watson, who went in that round, would be an example of that. Jamison Williams, the unknown. Paris Campbell is getting a lot of hype right now. I want to take it back to the 14th round here, guys, and talk about a guy was in the news again today, Deshaun Watson. There was a report out that there could be a decision made on Watson tomorrow. We've heard anywhere between 2 and 8 games. I have not read anything that it's going to be a full season suspension. But, Farrell, how would you handle a guy like Deshaun Watson? Are you going to do what Drake and McFarland did tonight and take him in the 14th round like the FFPC Best Ball ADP would dictate? Would he go higher for you? Is he off your board? How do you handle a player like him in his unique situation right now?
I think Turp might agree with me with this. In our football guys and main event teams, we often go one quarterback. When I'm going to go one quarterback, I'll go ahead and let a spot. If I can get a Watson in double-digit rounds, 14th, 15th round, I'll go ahead and pay for that second quarterback and carry him on my roster and hope. The good thing about it is we're going to know. We're going to know soon. And people that have kept him on their dynasty rosters are going to be very, very much rewarded. When we learn how much he's going to be available, that's what's going to be fascinating about how all the other Cleveland Browns move around the board, especially at the wide receiver position, their number 2 wide receiver especially.
Christian Watson recovering from a knee scope. No timetable on his return, but it sounded like it was a precautionary thing, something that was bothering him in OTAs, and they wanted to get it taken care of now. And this is as close as Romeo Doubs goes at the 1701. Christian Watson tonight at the 1504. It's as close as I can recall seeing these players go together. How do you handle Watson and Doubs now, especially with all the plays Doubs has been making in Green Bay?
I'm hoping Watson opens the season on the pup list so I can get out of the bed I made like an idiot. But Romeo Doubs, since you told me, I've asked you this question multiple times on the show, to pick a receiver. I've drafted him pretty much in every single draft since then. He's been free most of the time. The last week or so, he's been moving up. But for the 17th round on a team with Aaron Rodgers, stop talking about Allen Lazard. These people that keep 6th round Allen Lazard, stop. Allen Lazard is a solid second receiver. Fine, I'm good with that. But he's going to be facing the Jalen Ramseys of the world and the other top corners in football. He is not going to set the world on fire this year.
He's no Marvin Jones.
He is definitely no. He is definitely no Marvin Jones.
What can you tell us about the receiver Winfrey at Green Bay?
Yeah, not much. I know he made some plays last year, but by and large, the biggest run he got was in that Week 18 Detroit game when basically all the starters sat. That's when he got the majority of his production on. He's been good in practice from what I've heard. But I think he's sort of just a guy as far as fantasy goes. I would not be drafting him. Even in like the 28 round best balls, I wouldn't be taking Winfrey.
I made a statement last week that or last show that Dubs was different than all of the other Packer receivers. But I was wrong because I think he and Winfrey are very much similar in their physicality. And
my fear with Dubs is it's a Marshall situation from Carolina last year. You see him in a preseason game, he goes nuts. Then he starts getting up in like the 9th, 10th, 11th round drafts. And then there's so many questions. I don't know if I can justify him getting that high.
Yeah.
By the time late August, early September rolls around.
I don't think he will, but
did you think Marshall was going to get up there last year?
All right, okay. So Farrell,
Balky and I were not Marshall guys.
All right, no. So
I unfortunately was,
and you weren't alone, Turp. There's plenty of people like that. But Farrell, I'm going to make the case here for Dobbs ascending. What happens if he starts making plays in the preseason? What happens if Watson is still out? We're not going to see a whole lot. At least I don't think we'll see a whole lot of Lazard. And when people start drafting to, oh my goodness, it's the 9th round, I got to start swinging for the fences here. Maybe Dobbs will be the number 1 this year. Obviously, none of us three think the chances are good of that happening, but somebody out there might. And I'm with Turp at that point. It's like you're drafting him probably above his ceiling. I'm not on board with that. But right now, tonight, 17th round, get your shares of him now. You never
100 times out of 100.
Yeah, and he's a steal. We were drafting him back in January at the Super Bowl draft. He is the reason he won't ascend like Marshall did. Marshall, look at their history, and this kid will always have Nevada Reno next to his name, and people will look at that and they'll say,
But he also has Aaron Rodgers next to his name now.
Yeah, he does, but so does all the other receivers there. If you're going to say that, you will say, where does he fall on the depth chart? Let's draft the other guys. I don't think that I don't think that he ascends like Marshall or like Tolbert has this year. Even though you're thinking, Balky, that he could be in the same situation early that Tolbert is, that he could be a starting receiver for this team.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely. I mean, like right now, what are you trotting out there in 3 wide receiver sets? And we know the Packers use a lot of them, although Matt LaFleur has used fewer of them because he loves the tight ends on his roster. But
Lazard's the only sure thing.
Well, and I would imagine Cobb would probably be out there as well.
We'll have to call Two-Packer, and he'll tell us that Randy is the sure thing.
Randy Cobb, yes, the new forgotten man in Green Bay. Guys, let's talk about – let's see if I want to bring this up here, and I think I do. I'm just checking one thing here before I – so, okay, all right. Turp, round 16 here, I think it was. Jerick McKinnon, 3rd straight running back drafted by J.J. Zachariason here. He gets Jamal Williams, Brian Robinson, and then he takes Jerick McKinnon. Is McKinnon the answer there? The answer at Chiefs running back, given the value that you can get with him as opposed to what you have to give up for Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Ronald Jones?
I like the other two better, but there's so many questions with these three. I mean, do I think one player will emerge? I don't. I think it's just going to be a hot hand type of approach. I know Andy Reid likes to settle on a guy, but I just don't think they have that guy. CEH has shown you nothing. I know he was injured last year. He had some issues, but he started off camp with some issues this year. I know he's back off the PUP list and he's practicing now. Ronald Jones has always been flashy, but can't really catch the ball. McKinnon can do all that stuff, but he's also a guy that's been – I mean, they brought him back late in camp. I mean, is he really going to ever – he looked good in the playoffs last year. Let me get that out of the way right now. So McKinnon will be the guy that I would take the shot on late with the draft capital. I'm not taking CEH, and looks like 6th round he went. No, thank you.
Farrell, let's talk about the Arizona backfield. James Conner had a great season last year, and I think there's a lot of people out there that would tell you part of the reason he had such a great season was because he had a guy like Chase Edmonds not forcing Conner to be on the field for 70-80% of the snaps and kept him healthy the majority of the season. Chase Edmonds is in Miami now. Darrell Williams not only has moved from Kansas City to Arizona, he has moved into the 17th round selection for Fighting Chance Fantasy and the Fantasy Football Hustle podcast in Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland. Is Darrell Williams primed for a Chase Edmonds-like year this year, given what we saw with him in Kansas City last year?
The potential's there, and he follows in line with what they expect at the running back position. It's a team that that's the position that I want to be in business with on the Arizona Cardinals. And yeah, I would, in this format especially, I'd like to have both those guys.
It's definitely the number one training camp battle that I'm watching, probably more than any, because I don't have much James Conner. So one of these guys, if I don't have James Conner, is going to be valuable. So it's just a question of who looks better, who's getting the coach speak. I think it's going to be Darrell Williams, but it could be Benjamin. I mean, I think they drafted the rookie Ingram. One of those guys is going to be a fantasy focus this year. It's just a question of which one, because it's really unknown at this point. It's probably one of the battles I'm watching more than any other.
Terp, David Bell tonight, the rookie receiver who is in Cleveland Browns camp. I'm looking for him. I saw him earlier being selected. Okay, yeah, here he is. So he goes tonight at the 1609 to Steve Schatzel. Donovan Peoples-Jones then goes about a little over a half round later at the 1706 to Chris Hammond. Let's say, for the sake of this conversation, they're both roughly going at the same spot. Which one do you like better in this format? Is it DPJ or is it DB?
Right now, it's really hard to make that statement because the Deshaun Watson news is just so big when it comes to them.
Right.
If you're going to ask me if Jacoby Brissett's a quarterback for 8 games, I think it's Bell.
Okay.
I just don't think he can get, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who I think is the better player. If Deshaun Watson gets 2, 3, 4 games, that makes Donovan Peoples-Jones a better player. It's really hard for me to make a statement on that right now because I don't know what's going on with Deshaun Watson. It all depends on what his suspension. This is a perfect situation where I feel like you don't want to try to go heavy on one guy too much before the suspension comes out because Jacoby Brissett could be a complete disaster for 8 weeks, and these picks could be these picks could be worthless.
Farrell and I have talked about Velus Jones Jr. in Chicago. You talked about the big target volume for Darnell Mooney this year, Terp. Now, Jones ends up being selected tonight at the 1802 by Alex Dunlap as he's loading up on receivers. I believe that's his 9th receiver in 18 rounds. What about Velus Jones this year in Chicago, or is Mooney the only pass catcher you're interested in there from the wide receiver standpoint?
Mooney's definitely the leader by a large margin, but in this type of format, when you're talking about the 19th, 18th, 20th round, guys like Jones, guys like Pringle, or guys you got to take a shot on. It's another camp battle. It's very, very something I'm watching because it's pretty much Mooney and the 3 of us out there right now. It's just a question of who emerges, who gets that. The target share is there. It's just who's going to take it. And there's a lot of journeymen. There's a lot of guys who are younger players who might not be ready for the light yet. They're going to be thrown out there really quickly in the preseason. And if they can build a rapport with Justin Fields, I mean, Jones is definitely the type of guy that I'm watching, especially early in the preseason.
Farrell, let's talk about Team 2 here drafting tonight. It's the FFPC Joe tandem of Chris Herbert and Jeremiah Turner. They went heavy on those receivers right away, obviously with Kupp, Samuel, Evans, and then Judy, first 4 picks. They get Allen Lazard in the 6th, and then they've really, really centered in on the running backs, the tight ends. They get a couple 3, as we would say, here in Northeast Wisconsin, Carr, Matt Ryan, and Baker Mayfield. So what do you make of that approach, going receiver heavy in this format and then pounding out the running backs and tight ends? Is that an approach that you've tried and had any kind of success with?
I'm so elated when I have a little bit of rare success, Balky, that I don't know how in the hell I got there. I just kind of celebrate it. But, no matter where you get the players, the order that you get the players in is not as particularly important as to who the players are. And here they've drafted players that we admire at every position. We all 3 agree that Ronald Jones in the 10th round is one of the guys to have in Kansas City. McKissick will continue to do what McKissick does. Terp said it earlier. I'm a big Mostert fan. In this format, he's perfect. Look at the value they got. I would have peppered in another receiver instead of this 3rd quarterback. But all in all, these guys are fine. I'm not big on Hayden Hurst. I think there would be better opportunity. One being Brevin Jordan, and you could hope that by buying the lottery ticket that Logan Thomas somehow stays healthy. that would be if you're going to have 3 tight ends, that might be a better upside than Hayden Hurst.
Well, speaking of 3 tight ends, Terp, Trey McBride ends up getting selected tonight at the 1806, beg your pardon, to JJ Zachariason. He already had Dawson Knox and David Njoku. How good of a late round dart throw is McBride when you consider he's behind Zach Ertz? Hopkins is going to be back about a month and a half into the season. Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, AJ Green, a lot of pass catchers there. I know you don't like Arizona. Does this affect the Trey McBride selection as well as something that you would not want to be in business with?
I wouldn't do it, but it's a good upside pick for right there. I mean, Zach Ertz is getting up there in age. I mean, he's not error-proof when it comes to injuries and just lack of production. I know he came on last year when he got traded and things were good in Arizona. And a lot of people think that's going to, continue this year, especially with Hopkins out. But McBride's got a lot of positive press in camp. I think it's a perfect dart throw later in the draft. It's not for me because I'm not the biggest Arizona supporter this year. I know I'm a minority when it comes at, but if it's not Rondale Moore, I'm not really in on Arizona this year.
Farrell, we talked earlier, you and me and Terp, about the Eagles' backfield. We talked about Miles Sanders. We talked about Kenneth Gainwell. We did not talk about Boston Scott. Maybe you mentioned him, but I know I did not.
He just won't go away.
Right. So Boston Scott, and he wouldn't go away in this draft because he was the 19th round selection by Chris Hammond here as his number 6 running back. So Farrell, what kind of value, if for somebody who's viewing this, who's going to be drafting in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament or the Football Guys Players Championship, what kind of value does Boston Scott have this year?
He's going to score twice for you, both times against the New York Giants. He's and it's fantastic. He is the giant killer.
He won't go away.
Right. If anyone recognizes him as that, he's and he has deserved. He has earned and deserves a bigger role in this offense, and that's one of the dangers of having the other 2 guys and paying full value for them. Is that somebody may determine that, hey, Boston Scott deserves more. And if he gets it, I think he'll be successful at it. He's a very good football player.
It's just another reason not to be in love with Miles Sanders. Mm-hmm. They brought Boston Scott was a free agent. They brought him back. They could have just went with some rookies or some, other free agents that they could have brought in. They decided to bring him back.
You got a good player, keep the good player.
He's definitely a serviceable player. I don't know if I would classify him as a good player, but he's a solid
good player.
NFL
8 touchdowns last year, Terp. That's good.
Which is crazy if you really think about it. And I still go back to Miles Sanders had 0.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, speaking of the NFC East, speaking of the Giants, Matt Breida here goes in the 19th round to Larry Weinauer, who had Saquon Barkley as well. So he conceivably, you would think, has the top 2 running backs for the Giants locked up. Now, as Broward Bravado just brought up in the YouTube chat, the Giants actually worked out Devontae Booker, their old friend, and maybe he could come back. I'm guessing, Terp, that if that is the case, it sounds like the Giants probably aren't, loving Matt Breida as their backup running back. It's interesting because I love going with Jeff Wilson's another good example. I love going with these guys that are one injury away from a guy who's been hurt a lot. But maybe Matt Breida, because of his own injury history, the fact that they're bringing in Booker, you should probably look elsewhere in the 19th round. What do you?
He's definitely one of the handcuffs that I just have no interest in.
Okay.
I mean, if Barkley goes down, that team's going to be a disaster. I mean, I don't see they're working out Booker, like you said. That doesn't mean that they're in love with Breida. Breida's never had, the best injury history. I guess you can really not, it's not the worst thing in the world here, but I'd rather take a shot on a Tyler Batty or somebody like that with a little bit more upside than Breida.
Farrell, in one of the, I can't remember which one, but one of my Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship Draft Masters that completed a week or so ago, my last round pick, I beg your pardon, wasn't my last round pick. It was one of my last round picks. Devin Duvernay is who I selected. Mm-hmm. Now, he was a guy that I drafted in the 3rd round of rookie drafts, his rookie season in a lot of spots, because I felt like he was the type of guy that could not only be a deep threat, but was polished enough to catch the underneath stuff in Baltimore as well. 1 year later, I'm a lot less bullish on that. However, he's still being selected. No Marquise Brown in Baltimore. How would you rate Devin Duvernay as a last-round dart throw in the Pros versus Joe's FFPC Best Ball Tournament?
Well, yeah, you assume that some opportunity is going to be there. However, that position has never been fantasy relevant in Baltimore, nor do I expect it to be relevant with Duvernay. So I'm going to do something where the ball is. I'm going to pair my wide receiver with a passer, not a thrower, and that's where I'm going to go get my third or fourth receiver. So I would skip Duvernay, and I hope I'm proved wrong because I think he's. I think he's an excellent player. He's got a little dog in him, which you have to be to play in Baltimore offense as a wide receiver because you got to be ready to block somebody. I want to return, guys. Earlier last week we talked about there are always young running backs that come to the top during the preseason. Corbin, the running back out of Florida State, undrafted free agent with the New York Giants, is my guy in that backup position. And when they work out players like Devontae Booker, what they're doing, especially if they let him out of the building, they'll sign him. What they're doing is they're getting their sheet together, their depth, their quick call list to make sure that somebody's healthy and can get on the field and clear the physical quickly if they lose someone in camp.
Yep. Devin Duvernay's real-life teammate, James Prochet, is drafted tonight as Mr. Irrelevant by John Paulson from 4 for 4. And that will complete the draft tonight, guys. I know we talked about teams 10, 11, and 12 early. A lot of stuff has happened since then. I'll just give you both the floor, and Terp will start with you. Final thoughts on this draft. I know they start to blur together after a while, but is there anything that stands out? Favorite picks, least favorite picks, favorite teams, least favorite teams, Terp, when you look at this and try to figure out who the ultimate winner will be out of these 12 teams to cash that 2023 FFPC main event entry?
Team 3 is my favorite. I really like what they did, the structure of the team overall, getting Pitts, getting McCaffrey obviously falling to 3, and then just stacking receivers, mixing in some running backs that fit the upside build. I also like what Team 10 did. They're probably my 2 favorites out of all these rosters. There's not any teams here that I actually could say are really terrible. I usually try to pick one and just get the clickbait ready just in case they win the league and they can come back and make fun of me. But this is a pretty solid draft overall compared to some of the other ones we've done. But real quick before you go to Farrell, Team 11, the start, I don't like it at all. But
no, you don't.
No, I don't like Henry, and Akers. Like we said, we've all agreed.
Right,
should have been a receiver there, but Sutton might have been a thought or Mike Williams. But they recovered really, really well with the stack in Kansas City, my guy Treylon Burks. If they can just get to Hopkins coming back, this team looks a lot different. So they definitely, as the draft went on, got a lot better.
Yeah, I like their pick of Gordon. I like their pick of Tolbert. I thought
upside with those guys.
I thought towards the end they got in a little bit of trouble. I don't like their bottom 5 players, but all in all, yeah, that team's a little bit of mystery. It's hit and miss for me, but
the Akers pick might come back and bite them.
Yeah, and it's the top picks that make the difference. And yeah, I didn't care for the Akers pick. I agree with you at team number 3. However, I would have liked one earlier running back perhaps in there because, if you lose McCaffrey on this team, then how do you like it?
You lose.
Not much.
Yeah, I feel like if you draft McCaffrey,
yeah, you lose McCaffrey, you're done. But I feel like what we have a guy here that won our championship this past year, Mr. Steve Hawley, that won a major contest.
Oh yeah,
a $250,000 national contest once. Terp. He had the 1-1. He drafted David Johnson and lost David Johnson and continued to win the national contest. So I don't believe if you lose your first. Yeah, I don't believe if you lose your first-round draft pick that you're done. So
I wouldn't say you're in a lot of trouble.
Especially if it's that kind of build. But you're not in a lot of trouble if you know how to draft. That's why we have 20 spots. James Robinson and CeeDee Lamb took a lot of players to the championship a few years ago, and they were drafted in the 9th and 10th round, respectively.
James Robinson sure did. It was James Robinson, or I forget the other guy. Who was the other guy?
A couple years ago or last year?
No, when James Robinson was the rookie running back. It
was Fournette, wasn't it?
No, it was him or
Fournette was released.
The guy he had some illness or something like
at
that.
The end?
Yeah, it was. This. I'm looking it up right now.
It will drive me nuts.
Not Ramondre Stevenson. It was.
No.
Oh my God.
It's on the tip of my tongue. I remember this guy.
Whoever
Armstead. That's
yes,
there you go.
That 2 picks separated so many people in drafts because the press was never there, and James Robinson was getting drafted, I think, in double-digit rounds at that point, and people were drafting him one or the other. And if you drafted Armstead, you were in big trouble against the teams that drafted Robinson. That was a big equalizer in that year.
The big equalizers on this show, Farrell Elliott and Dave Terpoli. You check out Farrell's Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship at kffsc.com. Check out Terp on Twitter at Dave Terp. Farrell, main event for Kentucky rolling on here, both with slow and live drafts, right?
Yeah, we've sold a lot of spots as of, and Terp joining us here, and me joining you and Terp on the show. It's been 8 days. It's been 8 days where we've constantly gone to kffsc.com to find if Terp has selected a team. The answer still is no. 8 days of no from Dave
One
Terp.
of these years you're going to get me. It might be this year.
I wanted to thank everyone for joining in. We are geographically closest of all the 3 guests to the Tennessee Titans and one receiver, Burks. So if you want to come down here, Terp, or if you want to play online, it's kffsc.com. We'd love to have you.
And not just Terp. Anybody can go to kffsc.com.
Yeah, but I figure when Terp gets here, more people will come.
That's true.
We want to talk very, very quickly about Terp.
If you get the Terp, the people will come.
Exactly.
That's a saying.
One of Leroy Carson's all-time favorite people.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. The 2-a-day slow is filling right now. The next live event will be this coming Sunday night at 9 o'clock. Hey, you won't have to watch Pros versus Joes, so feel free to draft at kffsc.com. We will check that out as well. Terp, thank you so much for hopping aboard. Really appreciate it, guys, and we'll see you at 9/8 Central tomorrow.
See you guys tomorrow.
You got it. That is Dave Terp and the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, J. Farrell Elliott. That will conclude tonight's Pros versus Joes coverage. Do want to remind everybody that main event slow drafts off and running with the FFPC. Multiple football guys drafts filling every day. I'm commissioning the midnight one. Looks like there's still a few spots left in that, just 2 hours away from the first pick being selected. So make sure you're signing up for that at myffpc.com. We've been talking about the best ball tournament all night. Why? Well, because it's the same format as the Pros versus Joes, and the grand prize has been doubled and the prize pool has been doubled. Turn $125 into $200,000 and over $1 million prize pool with that. The Superflex Best Ball Tournament continues to fill fast. Dynasty startups over the next month and a half, roughly, maybe more closer to a month now, will be going on at myffpc.com. Slow, live, and sit and go best ball and classics going on at myffpc.com as well. We will be back. By the way, I want to thank Darren Armani, the FFPC, Farrell, Dave, our producer, mutual friend Rob, audio engineer, my best friend Bryce, and of course, all of you, our viewers tuning in tonight or listening to this later. I want to thank Jim Coventry for popping aboard the broadcast tonight as well. Always good to hear from that dude. Your Dead Meat. No, I'm not talking to you. That's the name of the league that's going off at 9/8 Central tomorrow as our Pros versus Joes coverage rolls on. It's our penultimate draft as League 5 goes off tomorrow. A lot of interesting guys in this one. Matt Marcoux, Mike Stanowski, they're the FFPC Joes drafting first. Both of those guys have been on this podcast before. Another guy who's been on, Lou Tranquilli, a guy who's had a lot of success at the high stakes level. Bill Van Ormer, you just saw him on these airwaves probably about a month or so ago. Former $500,000 FFPC main event winner Philip Hooton will also be drafting tomorrow. John Hurd, who has had a lot of success in the Football Guys Players Championship and the main event, will be drafting 9th tomorrow. And then another guy about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, he's on the Irish CEO. You've seen him in a ton of Football Guys drafts. He's drafting in Pros versus Joes tomorrow. Shane Wingard, he is drafting from the 11th spot. As far as the pros go, you're looking at Josh Hayes from Rotoballer, Doug Orth from FF Today, Pat Corain from NBC Sports Edge, Dan Williamson from the GOAT District, Liam Murphy from Fantasy Points, and Big Guy Fantasy Sports, Bob Lung, will all be aboard the broadcast tomorrow. Want to thank everybody who made this possible. Want to thank everybody who tuned in and enjoyed it. We will talk to you again tomorrow. Your week officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. It was broadcast live and was watched around the world. Balky and Farrell will be back next week with more analysis, more interviews, and more advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk with you again next week.
Hey, one other thing I should mention too, and I know it's not football related, but we lost a legend in the sports world today as Bill Russell passes away. He of 11 titles with the Boston Celtics, was a coach, been an ambassador for the game, one of the greatest players of all time, arguably the greatest center ever to play the game. He passes on at 88 years young today. Rest in peace, Bill Russell. We will talk to you again tomorrow.